In the matter of sepulture, for instance, I could see no signs of crematoria nor anything suggestive of tombs. That's a drag. But it occurred to me that possibly there might be cemeteries or crematoria somewhere beyond the range of my explorings. This again was a question I deliberately put to myself, and my curiosity was at first entirely defeated upon the point. The thing puzzled me, and I was led to make a further remark which puzzled me still more, that aged and infirm among this people there were none. Did you know that it's a very strange thing to put cemeteries within the city center? I don't want to say a very American thing, although I know they're fairly prevalent here where you can just, like, there's just cemeteries in town. Um, in Russia, they don't typically do that, or at least in the areas where like people I've met from Russia are. And then Mexico, I know also like cemeteries are kind of not in city centers. So that could be a very cultural difference. There's a lot of very interesting culture around death too, more than I could possibly convey or even know. I must confess that my satisfaction with my first theories of an automatic civilization and a decadent humanity did not long endure. Yet I could think of no other. Let me put my difficulties. The several big palaces I had explored were mere living places, great dining halls and sleeping apartments. I could find no machinery, no appliances of any kind. Yet these people were clothed in fabrics that must at times need renewal, and their sandals, though undecorated, were fairly complex specimens of metalwork. Somehow such things must be made, and the little people displayed no vestige of a creative tendency. There were no shops, no workshops, no sign of importations among them. They spent all their time in playing gently, in bathing in the river, in making love in a half playful fashion, in eating fruit and sleeping. I could not see how things were kept going. Then again, oh, my mother is calling me. Maribeth, I'm right here. What do you need? Um, then again, about the time machine, something I knew not what had taken it into the hollow pedestal of the White Sphinx. Why for the life of me I could not imagine. Those waterless wells, too, those flickering pillars. I felt I lacked a clue. I felt, how shall I put it? Suppose you found an inscription with sentences here and there in excellent plain English, and interpolated therewith other made up words of letters even, absolutely unknown to you. Well, on the third day of my visit, that was how the world of 802,701 presented itself to me. That day, too, I made a friend of a sort. It happened that as I was watching some of the little people bathing in a shallow, one of them was seized with cramp and began drifting downstream. The main current ran rather swiftly, but not too strongly, for even a moderate swimmer. I will give you an idea, therefore, of the strange deficiency of these creatures when I tell you that none made the slightest attempt to rescue the weakly crying little thing, which was drowning before their eyes. When I realized this, I hurriedly slipped off my clothes, and, wading in at a point lower down, I caught the poor mite and drew her safe to land. A little rubbing of the limbs soon brought her round, and I had the satisfaction of seeing she was all right before I left her. I had got to such a low estimate of her kind that I did not expect any gratitude from her. In that, however, I was wrong. My dog hears something at the window. Oh, so this happened in the morning. In the afternoon I met my little woman, as I believe it was, as I was returning towards my center for an exploration, and she received me with cries of delight and presented me with a big garland of flowers, evidently made for me and me alone. The thing took my imagination. Very possibly I had been feeling desolate, At any rate, I did my best to display my appreciation of the gift. We were soon seated together in a little stone arbor, engaged in conversation, chiefly of smiles. The creature's friendliness affected me exactly as a child's might have done. We passed each other flowers, and she kissed my hands. I did the same to hers. Then I tried talk, and found that her name was Weena, which, though I don't know what it meant, somehow seemed appropriate enough. That was the beginning of a queer friendship which lasted a week and ended as I will tell you. She was exactly like a child. She wanted to be with me always. She tried to follow me everywhere, and on my next journey out and about, it went to my heart to tire her down and leave her at last, exhausted and calling after me rather plaintively. But the problems of the world had to be mastered. I had not, I said to myself, come into the future to carry on a miniature flirtation. Yet her distress when I left her was very great. Her expostulations at the parting were sometimes frantic, and I think altogether I had as much trouble as comfort from her devotion. Hi, puppy. Nevertheless, she was, somehow, a very great comfort. I thought it was mere childish affection that made her cling to me, until it was too late. I did not clearly know what I had inflicted upon her when I left her, nor until it was too late did I clearly understand what she was to me. For by merely seeming fond of me, and showing in her weak, futile way that she cared for me, the little doll of a creature presently gave my return to the neighborhood of this white sphinx almost the feeling of coming home, and I would watch her for almost and I would watch her for tiny and I would watch her tiny figure of white and gold as soon as I came over the hill. It was from her, too, that I learned that fear had not yet left the world. She was fearless enough in the daylight, and she had the oddest confidence in me. For once, in a foolish moment, I made threatening grimaces at her, and she simply laughed at them. But she dreaded the dark, dreaded shadows, dreaded black things. Darkness to her was the one thing dreadful. It was a singularly passionate emotion, and it set me thinking and observing. I discovered then, among other things, that these little people gathered into the great houses after dark, and slept in droves. To enter upon them without a light was to put them in a tumult of apprehension. I never found one of the doors, or one sleeping alone within doors, after dark. Yet I was still such a blockhead that I missed the lesson of that fear, and in spite of Weena's distress, I insisted upon sleeping away from the slumbering multitudes. It troubled her greatly, but in the end her odd affection for me triumphed, and for 5 of the nights of our acquaintance, including the last night of all, she slept with her head pillowed on my arm. But my story slips away from me as I speak of her. It must have been the night before her rescue that I was awakened about dawn. I had been restless, dreaming most disagreeably that I was drowned, and that the sea anemones were feeling over my face with their soft palps. I woke with a start, and with an odd fancy that some grayish animal had rushed out of the chamber. I tried to get to sleep again, but I felt restless and uncomfortable. It was that dim gray hour when things were just creeping out of darkness, when everything is colorless and clear-cut and yet unreal. I got up and went down into the great hall, and so out upon the flagstones in front of the palace. I thought I would make a virtue of necessity and see the sunrise. It's the longest chapter ever. I don't remember ever having a fear of the dark, but I absolutely cannot be near slugs or snails. Bobby can tell you a little bit about me hiking and palming slugs the whole way up without realizing it, and when I did, I lost my mind. It's a weird fear. They're irrational for a reason. Slugs and snails. Ooh, and leeches, but I think I'm just more grossed out by them than anything, and I don't encounter them as often. So, favorite creature, sloth. Least favorite creature, slug/snail. The moon was setting, and the dying moonlight and the first pallor of dawn were mingled in a ghastly half-light. The bushes were inky black, the ground a somber gray, the sky colorless and cheerless, and up the hill I thought I could see ghosts. Several times as I scanned the slope, I saw white figures. Twice I fancied I saw a solitary white ape-like creature running rather quickly up the hill, and once near the ruins I saw a leash of them carrying some black body. They moved hastily. I did not see what became of them. It seemed that they vanished among the bushes. The dawn was still indistinct, you must understand. I was feeling that chill, uncertain, early morning feeling you may have known. I doubted my eyes. As the eastern sky grew brighter and the light of the day came on and its vivid coloring returned upon the world once more, I scanned the view keenly, but I saw no vestige of my white figures. They were mere creatures of the half-light. They must have been ghosts, I said. I wonder whence they dated. For a queer notion of Grant Allen's came into my head and amused me. If each generation die and leave ghosts, he argued, the world at last will get overcrowded with them. On that theory they would have grown innumerable some 800,000 years hence, and it was no great wondering to see four at once. But the jest was unsatisfying, and I was thinking of these figures all the morning, until Weena's rescue drove them from my head. I associated them in some indefinite way with the white animal I had startled in my first passionate search for the time machine. But Weena was a pleasant substitute. Yet all the same, they were soon destined to take far deadlier possession of my mind. I think I have said how much hotter than our own was the weather of this golden age. I cannot account for it. It may be that the sun was hotter, or the earth nearer the sun. It is usual to assume that the sun will go on cooling steadily in the future, but people unfamiliar with such speculations as those of the younger Darwin forget that their planet must ultimately fall back on one by one into the parent body. As these catastrophes occur, the sun will blaze with renewed energy, and it may be that some inner planet had suffered this fate. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that the sun was very much hotter than we know it. Global warming. H.G. Wells knew. Should we read this to some of the politicians? You just let them know I'm right here and I will educate them about anything they want in the public domain. Well, one very hot morning, my fourth, I think, as I was seeking shelter from the heat and glare in a colossal ruin, near the great house where I slept and fed, there happened this strange thing. Clambering among those heaps of masonry, I found a narrow gallery, whose end and side windows were blocked by fallen masses of stone. By contrast with the brilliancy outside, it seemed at first impenetrably dark to me. I entered it, groping, for the change from light to darkness made spots of color swim before me. I suddenly halted, spellbound. A pair of eyes, luminous by reflection against the daylight without, was watching me out of the darkness. Hi! Hey, Wilson, how are you? This is exactly, get Jackson on, read bedtime stories. We're learning a little science here. Got some validation for global warming already. Or are you just lurking, Brian? That's it. Bobby's gonna type. I called him. Good, somebody had to. All right. The old indistinctive dread of wild beasts came upon me. I clenched my hands and steadfastly looked into the glaring eyeballs. I was afraid to turn. Oh, hi, Jackson. Then the thought of absolute security in which humanity appeared to be living came to my mind. And then I remembered that strange terror of the dark. Overcoming my fear to some extent, I advanced a step and spoke. I will admit that my voice was harsh and ill-controlled. I put out my hand and touched something soft. At once the eyes darted sideways, and something white ran past me. I turned with my heart in my mouth and saw a queer little ape-like figure, its head held down in a peculiar manner, running across the sunlit space behind me. It blundered against a block of granite, staggered aside, and in a moment was hidden in a black shadow beneath another pile of ruined masonry. My impression of it is, of course, imperfect, but I know it was a dull white and had strange, large, grayish-red eyes. Also that there was flaxen hair on its head and down its back. But as I say, it went too fast for me to see it distinctly. I cannot even say whether it ran on all fours or only with its forearms held very low. After an instant's pause, I followed it into the second heap of ruins. I could not find it at first, but after a time in the profound obscurity, I came upon one of those round, well-like openings of which I have told you, half closed by a fallen pillar. A sudden thought came to me. Could this thing have vanished down the shaft? I lit a match, and looking down, I saw a small white moving creature, with large, bright eyes, which regarded me steadfastly as I retreated. It made me shudder. It was so like a human spider. It was clambering down the wall, and now I saw for the first time a number of metal foot and hand rests forming a kind of ladder down the shaft. Then the light burned my fingers and fell out of my hand, going out as it dripped, and when I lit another, the little monster had disappeared. I do not know how long I sat peering down the well. It was not for some time that I could succeed in persuading myself that the thing I had seen was human, but gradually the truth dawned on me, that man had not remained one species, but had differentiated into two distinct animals, that my graceful children of the upper world were not the sole descendants of our generation, but that this bleached, obscene, nocturnal thing, which had flashed before me, was also heir to all the ages. All right, are you team golden creature or team bleached, obscene, nocturnal thing? There's something more alluring about being the nocturnal monster. But any thoughts? Who out there is a golden daylight child and who's an obscene nocturnal creature? Lurkers, lurkers. I thought of the flickering pillars and of my theory of an underground ventilation. I began. Chris, you're thinking, all right, someone's thinking about it. I began to suspect their true import. For what I wondered was this lemur doing in my scheme of a perfectly balanced organization? How was it related to the indolent serenity of the beautiful upper worlders? And what was hidden down there at the foot of that shaft? I sat upon the edge of the well, telling myself that, at any rate, there was nothing to fear, and that there I must descend for the solution of my difficulties. And withal, I was absolutely afraid to go. Oh, I don't know when you sleep, honestly, Chris, because you work too much. Are you still at work now, I bet? But you are. As I hesitated, two of the beautiful upper world people came running in their amorous sport across the daylight in the shadow. The male pursued the female, flinging flowers at her as he ran. I love that. All I have to do is click the link for big follows. Oh. Was that the first time somebody tried to pander, self-promote, or do nonsense in the chat? We're not here for that. Also, if anyone's interested in how to pursue me, you should run flinging flowers at me. Just for the record. They seemed distressed to find me, my arm against the overturned pillar, peering down the well. Apparently it was considered bad form to remark these apertures, for when I pointed to this one and tried to frame a question about it in their tongue, they were still more visibly distressed and turned away. But they were interested by my matches, and I struck some to amuse them. I tried them again about the well, and again I failed. So presently I left them, meaning to go back to Weena and see what I could get from her. But my mind was already in revolution. My guesses and impressions were slipping and sliding to a new adjustment. I had now a clue to the import of these wells, to the ventilating towers, to the mystery of the ghosts, to say nothing of a hint of the meaning of the bronze gate and the fate of the time machine. And very vaguely there came a suggestion towards the solution of the economic problem that had puzzled me. Here was the new view. Plainly, the second species of man was subterranean. There were three circumstances in particular which made me think that its rare emergence above ground was the outcome of a long-continued underground look common in most animals that live largely in the dark. The white fish of the Kentucky caves, for instance. Then those large eyes with the capacity for reflecting light are common features of nocturnal things. Witness the owl and the cat. And last of all, that evident confusion in the sunshine, that hasty yet fumbling, awkward flight towards dark shadow, and that peculiar carriage of the head while in the light, all reinforce the theory of an extreme sensitiveness of the retina. Beneath my feet, then, the earth must be tunneled enormously, and these tunnelings were the habit of the new race. The presence of ventilating shafts and wells along the hills, slopes, everywhere, in fact, except along the river valley, showed how universal were its ramifications. What so natural then as it assumed that it was in this artificial underworld that such work as was necessary to the comfort of the daylight race was done. The notion was so plausible that I at once accepted it, and went on to assume the how of this splitting of the human species. I dare say you will anticipate the shape of my theory, though for myself I very soon felt that it fell far short of the truth. Oh, absolutely. I will try to read it as fluently as possible. It's hard to read out loud. Oh, and you're welcome to follow because I will, my whole spiel is that I'm just going to kind of keep reading. So if you know anybody else that likes this or you just want to be alerted when I'm coming up, please give me a follow. I'm kind of new here. Oh, thank you. All the books I'm going to read are in the public domain, which means you should be able to get, I'm assuming, copies in Spanish as well. So maybe even following along will make it a little easier to understand. All right. At first, proceeding from the problems of our own age, it seemed clear as daylight to me that the gradual widening of the present merely temporary and social difference between the capitalist and the laborer was the key to the whole position. No doubt it will seem grotesque enough to you, and wildly incredible, and yet even now there are existing circumstances to point that way. There is a tendency to utilize underground space for the less ornamental purpose of civilization. There, in the metropolitan railways of London, for instance, there are new electric railways there. There are subways, there are underground workrooms and restaurants, and they increase and multiply. Evidently, I thought this tendency had increased till industry had gradually lost its birthright in the sky. I mean that it had gone deeper and deeper into larger and ever larger underground factories, spending a still increasing amount of time therein, till in the end. Even now, does not an East End worker live in such artificial conditions as practically to be cut off from the natural surface of the earth? Again, the exclusive tendency of richer people, due no doubt to the increasing refinement of their education, and the widening gulf between them and the rude violence of the poor, is already leading to the closing, in their interest, of considerable portions of the surface of the land. About London, for instance, perhaps half the prettier country is shut in against intrusion. And this same widening gulf which is due to the length and expense of the higher educational process and the increased facilities for and temptations towards refined habit on part of the rich, will make that exchange between class and class, that promotion by intermarriage, which at present retards the splitting of our species along lines of social stratification, less and less frequent. So in the end, above ground, you must have the haves, pursuing pleasure and comfort and beauty, and below have the have-nots, the workers getting continually adapted to the conditions of their labor. Once they were there, they would no doubt have to pay rent, and not a little of it, for the ventilation of their caverns, and if they refused, they would starve or be suffocated for arrears. Such of them as were so constituted as to be miserable and rebellious would die, and in the end, the balance being permanent, the survivors would become all well adapted to the conditions of underground life, and as happy in their way as the upper world people were to theirs. As it seemed to me, the refined beauty and the idealated pallor followed naturally enough. The great triumph of humanity I had dreamed of took a different shape in my mind. It had been no such triumph of moral education and general cooperation as I had imagined. Instead, I saw a real aristocracy armed with a perfected science of working to a logical conclusion the industrial system of today. Its triumph had not been simply a triumph over nature, but a triumph over nature and the fellow man. This, I must warn you, was my theory at the time. I had no convenient cicerone in the pattern of the utopian books. My explanation may be absolutely wrong. I still think it is the most plausible one. But even on this supposition, the balanced civilization that was at last attained must have long since passed its zenith, and was now far fallen into decay. The too perfect security of the upper worlders had led them to a slow movement of degeneration, to a general dwindling in size, strength, and intelligence. That I could see clearly enough already. What had happened to the undergrounders I did not yet suspect, but from what I had seen of the Morlocks, that by the by was the name by which these creatures were called, I could imagine that the modification of human type was even far more profound than among the Eloi, the beautiful race that I already knew. Then came troublesome doubts. Why had the Morlocks taken my time machine? For I felt sure it was they who had taken it. Why, too, if the Eloi were masters, could they not restore the machine to me? And why were they so terribly afraid of the dark? I proceeded, as I have said, to question Weena about this underworld, but here again I was disappointed. At first she would not understand my questions, and presently she refused to answer them. She shivered as though the topic was unendurable, and when I pressed her, perhaps a little too harshly, she burst into tears. They were the only tears except my own I ever saw in that golden age. When I saw them, I ceased abruptly to trouble about the Morlocks, and was only concerned in banishing these signs of human inheritance from Weena's eyes. And very soon she was smiling and clapping her hands, while I solemnly burned a match. I still get that much joy out of matches, so I totally get it, Weena. That was chapter 5. That was a doozy. I think that was the longest stretch I had without a little break. How's everyone doing? Do I still have some people there with me? I think I might stop after that chapter because the next one goes on for quite a bit too, and I already feel my voice getting a little hoarse. Still haven't really figured out a schedule yet, but anyone who wants to, if you follow me, it'll be easy to see what I'm gonna post again. And if the weather here stays this hot and miserable, maybe I'll do something again tomorrow. Oh, and if you missed the beginning part of the chapter, you can go onto YouTube to rewatch it. Reading Ron has been great too. Yes, my new name will be Reading Ron. You can find me on Instagram at Rosie underscore Outlook, but it's Rosie ROSIE underscore Outlook. You will see me doing a lot of outdoor adventure things, and you'll always be able to find me here. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you soon. Bye.